Hey guys, it's Gary again. Had an idea for a video, not an epic. Um, just thought I'd run with it. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot of preparation for it. Today I'm going to show you a fairly small stack of avant-garde electronics, mainly I wouldn't say compilation albums, but multi-artist albums in series, most of them. And if you don't know what I mean, I'll kind of explain as I go along. Most of these are pretty much unknown artists by me and probably by most folks. Seems like most of the artists featured on this CD are on these CDs, these series in general, are pretty much academic music teachers, electronic music teachers. It's kind of interesting that some of the people in the world making the most adventurous, interesting music can't make a living doing it, and end up becoming teachers in universities in various different musical styles. Like I said, a lot of these people, it seems, are involved in electronics, but a lot of them are just standard, I guess, music teachers, theory teachers, instrument teachers, piano, whatever. So that's interesting in and of itself, and the fact that being teachers, they have full-time jobs. It's a wonder that they get anything out musically in terms of getting the free time to do creative stuff. So for the most part, I could have included a lot more CDs here if I had included avant-garde electronic musicians, CDs that I have that are just by one artist, by one specific artist. Then it would have kind of gotten out of hand, I think, and I might do that maybe at a later date. I have a couple exceptions, and I'll explain them when I get to them. For the most part, these are all CDs of various electronic musicians and compilation. Not compilations in the sense of what you're used to. Most of the works, I believe, were compiled specifically for these CDs by multiple artists. The one that's probably the easiest to get, this one called Imaginary Landscapes, and for some reason, I can remember buying this. I can remember the store that I bought this in. Seeing it in the store before the internet. So, just flipping through. That was kind of a wonder when you would go to a CD store, especially when you found things that were not commercially viable things, and, the pop music things, whether it's, the jazz stuff or, the classical, top 10 classical or whatever. When you find things like this that are probably of very little interest to people in old-fashioned CD stores. This is Imaginary Landscapes. It's on the Elektra Nonesuch label. This may still be in print. What's the date on here? 1989. Wow, I didn't realize it was that old. I know I bought it as a new release, and I know I bought it before the internet days. And all of these are avant-garde electronics. There's no way around it. It's not easy listening, new age stuff. I almost hesitated on doing this video because it has limited appeal. I know Carm would love this stuff. Chris Cole would certainly, he's way above me. He probably already has all these. To what extent it's interesting to other people, I just don't know. But there's a few names on this one, for instance. Blue Jean Tyranny is somebody that I've heard of. I think I have some work somewhere else. He's been around as one of those. Some of these I just recognize as artists who have been around and have made contributions to other CDs of electronic music. So I got to know them just strictly through this music and not through necessarily other things that they've done. David Tudor, which I've known of, probably would be familiar with him. He may have worked with John Cage at one point. Christian Marclay is someone I don't know. Alvin Lucier is someone I do know from listening to the radio, actually. I think I've talked about this program on an NPR station, syndicated all over. It originates from New York. It's called New Sounds. It's on every night, 7 nights a week. It's an hour-long show of unusual music, and this is their fortes. Electronic music. They feature everything. They play music by Oregon and Ralph Towner and various ethnic music, experimental music of all types. And I remember hearing an Alvin Lucier piece on there, and then seeing some of his albums in stores. Neil B. Rolnick is another contributor to this album, who's somebody that I just know of because he seems to contribute to a lot of these avant-garde electronics albums. Shelley Hirsch and David Weinstein. Not sure if I'm familiar with them. For some reason, the names ring a bell, but it could be just a similarity to someone else. So these are all just that run over an hour. This is produced in cooperation with The Kitchen, which was, I think it is, I'm not sure if it's still around, kind of an avant-garde music loft performance center in New York City. But very avant-garde stuff. 13 tracks on here by different artists. So the only downside to most of these is because it is multi-artist albums, you don't get really long pieces on there, which is the type of thing that's really nice to experience in this kind of music, to have a nice 20, 30-plus minute piece to get lost in. But because of the nature of these records, you don't unfortunately get the opportunity for most of these to have that. So that's from '89. Elektra Nonesuch, probably the biggest label here. None of the other labels am I really all that familiar with, apart from these releases. Here's one that's like a one-off. Neuma, Neuma Records in Massachusetts, USA. Neuma Electro-Acoustic Music 1. I don't know if there was any follow-ups to this. I've never seen anything else on this label. Again, there's artists that I've heard of. I've heard of Paul Lansky. Charles Dodge I've heard of from the Columbia Princeton album and from some of his own works, which I have. I'm not showing the Columbia Princeton album here because it's very specifically, maybe I should have. Columbia Princeton, forget what the name of it is. It's Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center, I think it's called. And it's all music that came out of the Columbia Princeton Center I think it was starting in the 50s and in the 60s. And I know Charles Dodge from there. And actually, again, the same station that plays New Sounds, it used to be a classical music station. Overnight, they used to play classical music from like midnight till 5 or 6 a.m. And they played all kinds of avant-garde music mixed in with classical music. And I remember hearing Charles Dodge, Earth's Magnetic Field, from the Columbia Princeton album there, which is what made me eventually seek out and buy that Columbia Princeton album. Maybe I should have shown that one. And then I found some solo album by Charles Dodge. So apparently Charles Dodge is fairly well known in this circle. I didn't look up any of the individuals here to see if any of them are alive still at this point. Charles Dodge may be alive. Most of the folks on here that I'm familiar with have been around long enough, so it's kind of questionable if they're still around. But Charles Dodge is certainly one of those folks that if you're into avant-garde electronics, experimental music, you would probably have heard of him. He's fairly well known. And again, this disc, I don't know if they ever followed this up with any. It's like I say, Neuma Records out of Massachusetts, of all places. Another hour-long album. Let me see, how many different artists? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different artists. Some of them playing cello, mixed in with the electronics, the soprano vocalists, mostly electronics. It's pretty good, pretty out there stuff. I'll have to look to see if they ever followed up or if that label still exists anymore. Here's one on, I can't read this. New World Records. Oh, wait a minute. I did include. Here's my Columbia Princeton. I did grab this. It is called Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center, 1961 to 1973. So it's all music that came out of artists working at the Columbia Princeton Music Center here in New Jersey during this period. The thing that made me pick this up, like I mentioned, is hearing Charles Dodge's Earth's Magnetic Field, which was on this album. I'm not clear if it's an excerpt that's on here from the longer piece. because I couldn't find a longer version or another version apart from the one that's on here. Some incredible pieces. Ingram Marshall, which is a name you may be familiar with. Alice Shields, which is another name that I've heard of. Charles Dodge. Bulent Arel, Arel, which is a name that I've seen before. Daria Semenjin, and Alice Shields. So there's a bunch of artists on here. This is one of the. I'm going to probably recommend about 3 of these. Very avant-garde, but I like this one. So this would be one of the 3 that I would highly recommend if you're going to dip your toes into this, or if you're into this kind of music and don't have these. I have 3 here that I'm going to highly recommend. And this is limited to a specific period, as you can see, 1961 to 73. So kind of the early days of experimental electronics. Certainly a worthwhile album. Like most of these, there's going to be tracks that you probably don't like. There's tracks that are that could definitely fall under the category of being grating. But anyway, here's another one from New World Records. Or is this the first one on New World Records? I know I have a couple here on New World Records. Excuse me, guys. I can't read this. New World Records is out of New York City. This one is fairly recent. It has a 2006 date on it, and I just got this last year. Pioneers of Electronic Music. This is one of those ones that I stumbled across, so I'm sure this is not in print because I've had this less than a year. I might have even gotten it just this past Christmas. 2006, it's on a New York-based label, New World Records. Alice Shields again, so her name keeps popping up on these various compilations. Bulent Arel again. There's a bunch of names that I am not familiar with on here as well. I guess Alice Shields is probably the one that's name has popped up the most. Apparently this is a re-release, it looks like, because there's a note on here saying this recording was originally released on Composers Recordings Incorporated. So it sounds like it was a private kind of label that the musicians put out initially, and this New World Records picked up. So looking at most of the pieces. That Bulent Arel apparently passed away. Lived from 1919 to 1990. The pieces on here. There's a lot of pieces from 1970, 1969, 1968, 1970, 1952, if you can imagine electronics, from 1952 and 1956, 68, 53, 69, 70, 71. So there's a lot of early stuff. So again, this is stuff that goes from the early 50s to the early 70s. I kind of like that period. Obviously, electronics have advanced so far, and it's not that you can't make this kind of music now, but it was such an effort then, because during this time, pretty much all these instruments that they were using were monophonic. There was a lot of work involved in making something, of this nature back then. A lot of imagination had to go into it. Nowadays, a lot of these sounds are just there with any cheap synthesizer you could probably buy with the push of a button. But these people had, huge synthesizers that, filled rooms with the patch cords and everything, like you might see in the old Berlin School, late 60s, early 70s, Klaus Schultz and Tangerine Dream and Wendy Carlos type of thing. It took a lot of imagination to come up with these things and recording techniques to get this stuff down on tape. And I just have a fondness for that early period stuff. I think a lot of people do. Here's another one. I remember I found this online at Tower Records, and this came out in 1988 from Berkeley, California. Even though the CD is printed in Japan, this record label is based in Berkeley, California. It's simply called Music and Arts Programs of America. And I love this cover, too. It's called Another Coast. This is the only thing I have on this label, so I'm not so sure how big this Music and Arts Programs of America label is. And I bought this in '88, and this is pretty out there. I'm going to recommend this one, but it's pretty out there. Um, and I love it. There's just something otherworldly about a lot of the pieces on this. And Paul Drescher, which is a name, if you're into this kind of music, you probably would have heard of, even if you don't know. He does an 11.5-minute piece on here. I think he's the only person that I really knew that I had heard of before. I thought for sure this would be out of print, being that the CD came out in 1988. And since I knew I was going to recommend this one, I went on to Amazon just to see what the status was, and was surprised to see that it's actually in print and still readily available. It has a 2006 date on it, so it seems like it was re-released in 2006. So I don't know if it's on the same label, if it's on a different label. I think the cover art's the same, but it looks like it got reissued, because I was pretty sure this was out of print for a number of years. In 2006, went back in print again. There was one review of it, of somebody else who had actually bought the original, as I have, a 1988 edition of it. That was surprised to see it still available, because of the nature of the music is. I got to wonder if they sold 2,000 or 3,000 copies of something like this. Would probably be a lot, unfortunately. So Paul Drescher's on here. Carl Stone, Maggie Payne, Paul D. Marinis, Paul D. Marinis. Two pieces by Paul Drescher. Paul Drescher gets about 23 minutes worth of time on here, and two pieces by Carl Stone. So there's not a lot of 72 minutes, 30 seconds. Pretty good deal. I think I might have jumped on this because it was fairly inexpensive at the time I bought it. I actually bought it on Tower Records website. This is when the stores were still in existence, too. And they used to have pretty good clearance sales. And pretty good, oddly enough, sales on out-of-print things. And for some reason, I think when I picked this up, this was out of print, with remaining copies left over because I bought it in the very early 90s. Nice to see this is in print again. Some pretty out-there stuff. Not as blatantly experimental and out there as a lot of this stuff. As always, there's tracks which... these things don't necessarily flow because they're different artists just contributing pieces. They're not being concerned with it fitting the theme of an album so that it flows the same from beginning to end, obviously. Different artists are not listening to what the other pieces are that the other artists are putting on the albums. But remember, there seems to be one thing on this album. I think it's playing now. That sounds like a car driving down a road or something like that. That sticks with me. But Another Coast. I like the album cover. I like the album. I was amazed to find this in print. It's the only thing I've ever seen on this label. Again, I'm not sure what the label is that put it out now. And now we're getting to series, of which there are multiples of. I've showed this before. The next two I've shown before. Wergo, which is a WERGO German label. They do a lot of avant-garde music, a lot of avant-garde jazz and acoustic music. They're not really known for doing a lot of electronic music, but they do have this series of music. They just call it Music with Computers. Now, oddly enough, this one doesn't have a number on it, but every other one I've seen has numbers on it. This is one of those that I would love to get the whole series for. It's getting a little noisy back there. This is one I would love to have the whole series for, and I don't know how many there are in the series, but there's more than a. I want to say close to 20 or so. I get the series confused, and this is the odd man out because it doesn't have a number. This is one I bought in the Tower Records store. I paid $20 for it, and I really took a chance on it because I didn't know the artists, but it was computer music. It looked like something I'd be interested in, and it is. William Schottstatt is an artist on here, which oddly enough I had heard again on that New Sounds radio program, but I only knew his name. I wasn't really sure what kind of music he did. Chris Chaffee was a cello player who does something with electronics involved with the cello. And the guy David Jaffe, who is an electronic music person who has a 20-minute piece on. There's only actually 3 artists on here. William Shotstadt gets over 20 minutes on here as a piece. This is not one. I really like this one too. Again, this is the only one I had until recently in this series. I can't find these cheap. Like I said, I paid $20 for this, plus tax. So that's quite an expensive blind to buy. This is the only one in the series I had until I was so kindly gifted through VCLT of another one. This one is number 12 in the series, the Word Go Music with Computers, done by 2 artists, which I kind of like. If they're going to do multi-artist, it's nice that they both have enough time to stretch out. One artist has about 18 minutes worth of material on here, and the other one has 35 minutes. Yeah, 35 minutes worth of material on here. Thierry Lancino and Tomas Ungvare. Neither one. I like this. Even though this is the main artist on here, the one to 35 minutes, Thierry Lancino, is it's certainly avant-garde, but it's mostly acoustic based. There is boys choir, soloist, horns, flutes, and it's lightly treated with electronics. It's not out and out electronics. Very, very good. Andrew from California sent me this, and I love it. Thanks again, Andrew. But this whole series, again, numbers into the 20s, 25. This is 95. Okay, this one's from 95, and it's number 12. So I want to say they're probably way up past 20. And I forgot what the numbers were. I did a search just to see, like on Amazon, how many volumes there were. There's quite a lot of volumes on there. Again, that's on the Word-Go, which is a great label in Germany, but their distribution here is pretty much non-existent. So they only come over as pricey imports for the most part. Now, an American label, Centaur Records, which I've never seen anything else on Centaur Records in my life except for this series. They have the CDCM Computer Music Series. I love their little logo of the Centaur there. It's probably not going to come out. Let me turn the autofocus here. Can you see that? No, probably not. There are over 40 volumes in this, and I want to say it started probably in the 80s, in the early 80s. And again, multi-artist things. A lot of the same artists pop up on these. Neil B. Rolnick, he's probably on half of these. Pauline Oliveros, very well known for people that are into this kind of music. And she actually does, Pauline actually does things that could be described as kind of calm and peaceful, which most of these artists can't be really described as. Joel Chadaby, which is a name that I've heard, again, I think from the radio. This is volume 7. Volume 7 from 1990. They've really kept these coming because I know I looked and they were up past 40 volumes. This is a series I would love to have every single volume of. A lot of difficult stuff on here. Julie Cabot, Barton McLean, Joel Chadaby. Again, about 5 different people on here. I know their names and I know some of their works. Oddly enough, on the Pauline Oliveros track, Robert Rich was the recording engineer. Robert Rich, you may know as the electronic music artist. I just caught that now. Probably if I read a lot of these tracks, I'd probably see a lot of names that I recognize. Most of these seem to how they work these is they seem to on each volume they have multiple artists who apparently all work out of the same musical institute or music school or whatever it is. All these artists come on this particular volume 7 come out of Troy, New York, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So I guess these are people that have taught there and have worked out of there, because it seems like they specify artists working from a specific locale on each volume. And like I said, over 40 volumes. Here's volume 2 from 1988. So the other one was volume 7 from 1990. So you can see they do a bunch every year. So 1988, 1987 would have been around the time they started these. Neil Rolnick again appears on these. And Richard Teitelbaum, who you may know if you're a fan of this kind of music, he's another one of those giants from this world. So you would probably know Richard Teitelbaum if you're into this kind of music. And I want to say, I think he recorded with Anthony Braxton as well. I know Anthony Braxton's recorded some avant-garde electronics with a couple known people. And I wouldn't be surprised if they both taught out of the same place, because I know Anthony Braxton's done some teaching. Once again, this is from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, which I guess it has in common with the Volume 7, the previous one that I showed. Basically out of the same locale. And this is 1988. Breaking the mold. You know what? I just wanted to show my Charles Dodge. This is the only one I was able to find. Charles Dodge, as a solo artist, having one complete CD just to him. I did find this one. I haven't been able to find a full recording of Earth's Magnetic Field. Like I mentioned, it's on the Columbia Princeton album. But I believe that's an excerpt, but I can't be sure. But I did find this, and I quickly snatched it up. This is from a New York label. Where is this from? New World Records. So they do. I guess not only do they put out the compilation of artists, but I guess they go back and give those artists full albums. I know I tried to avoid showing... I was going to keep this on a series, but there's a few artists that I did want to show. And I'll show you why. Here's another Centaur. This is volume 19 from 1994. This is one of the few when they gave, this is part of the regular series of multi-artists, but this is one of only about 2 examples that I've seen of where they gave one composer the entire CD and didn't split it amongst multiple composers. So apparently this guy, who I was not familiar with, but I've seen his name pop up a lot since, Larry Austin. This is, like I said, Volume 19 of the CDCM Computer Music Series. This is from 1994. And this is called the Larry Austin Retrospective, 1967 to 1994. So it's apparently works that were written by Larry Austin. One of the people, David Tudor, are actually listed here as a performer. So we've got sound projections for piano with computer music. Fractals for musicians and computer band. So it seems like there's a lot of things here for piano, percussion combined with delay system, and electronic music on tape. So there's a mixture of acoustic and electronic instruments in here. A piece from 1967 called Accidents for Electronically Prepared Piano and Bucala Electronic Music System. David Tudor Piano, Larry Austin Electronics. So this is one of the few times that they pretty much allowed one composer to take over the entire CD. Pretty avant-garde stuff. I hope that's not too loud in the background. What you're hearing in the background, I'm about to show you. It's the musical equivalent of The Birth of a World. Probably our world. And I got to admit, I bought this one because of the cover, but I was already into the series because, once again, it's the CDCM Computer Music Series. This is number 4 from 1989, And as simple as it is, I love that cover. It's just a palm tree with a blue background. And I know Jeff is going to say, "What's with the blue, Gary?" I guess you're right. I guess I like blue. I love that. It's so simple. It's like a pen and ink drawing. That's all it is, of a palm tree. And yet, damn it, I love it. I remember where I saw this in the Sam Goody store, and I bought it, and it was like $19. I'm like, I probably could get this cheaper somewhere else. But I had to have it. I knew the series. I knew the series. It's volume 4 of the Centaur series. This, again, is the only other instance I'm aware of where they gave an entire composer one album. And this is one of the others. Of the 3 that I'm going to recommend, this is numero uno for me. David Rosenboom, who is somebody that I was not familiar with, but I did buy a follow-up CD afterwards, which isn't nearly as good. I did follow him. I will still follow him. But this is simply one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. Forget about genres of music. It's supposed to represent the creation of a world, and it's playing in the background. And I'll tell you, if there was an album I was going to listen to with headphones, this would be it. Not even loud, but just to get all of the stuff that's going on orally in this musical world that's going on. My hearing is severely damaged, so I don't listen with headphones on very often. But this is one of the few albums that, is worth the experience. It's simply incredible. And this was, I believe, the first time that the CDCM music series, being Volume 4, actually gave over the entire CD to one composer. But when you hear the work, it's incredible. How long is it? It's about just under 64 minutes. There's 7 sections to it, but it's essentially one piece. Recorded January to February 1987 and February to May 1988. Production, composition, performance, David Rosenboom. So this came out in 1989. This, I guess Rosenboom is based out of the Center for Contemporary Music at Mills College, Oakland, California. Which he taught there for a number of years. He may still be teaching there. And again, this is on the Centaur label, CDCM Computer Music Series. This is such a mind-blowing trip. This is the kind of thing that when I listen to this, I often thought that that this would be the kind of thing that when I was in high school in the mid-'70s and people were listening to Pink Floyd and Yes albums and doing drugs and spacing out to them, this would be the kind of thing that they should have been listening to, or they thought they were listening to, but they simply didn't know that music like this existed. Of course, it didn't exist back then because it came out years later. But I think there's a lot of people listening to quote unquote spacey music that didn't have a clue, that didn't know who the Berlin musicians are and the Tangerine Dreams and Klaus Schultzes, which were around then. This piece is called Systems of Judgment, composed in 1987. It was the musical score for choreographic work at a dance art company in San Francisco. I can't see watching anything when you listen to this. Just turn the lights out. If there was ever a turn the lights out and listen to this music album, this is it. It's not grating at all, but if you put it up loud, I guess it could be. There's electronics going on, but it's very hard. It's so perfectly incorporated with the acoustic instruments. You can hear that there's violin in the mix. You can hear that there's acoustic piano in the mix. Pretty much everything else is hard to tell. It's probably all coming from electronics and synthesizers. Kurzweil digital synthesizer, Oberheim expander, which is another synthesizer. Macintosh computer. This would have been early Apple computer. Computer music instrument. Gentle electric pitch follower. Lexicon digital effects processor. It doesn't really tell you much. As far as the music goes, I know somewhere in here, I can't find a musician listening. even though it may, it may all be. I thought there were other musicians playing on this. I could be wrong. This could be old David Rosenboom. I definitely hear. I definitely hear piano. Here we go. Non-electronic instruments used in live performance include violin, which I definitely hear, piano, and light percussion instruments from Africa, Middle East, North America, and Australia. Don't hear the percussion so much. There's no beat or rhythm to any of this album, and there's a lot of electronics. And I like the way they mix the violin. It's not like soaring on top of everything else. It's just in there with this oozing, forming. There's nothing necessarily melodically that you can even hang your hat on. You just have to sit and listen to it. There's nothing you can count at bars and say it's going fast, it's going slow. It's very, very abstract, but really beautiful. I think it's easier to get into, say, than like some of the free jazz stuff with the honking saxophones and stuff like that. Though I would think that people that like free jazz could appreciate this in the same way that you would listen to free jazz, I guess. But this is my highest recommendation. I think this one is out of print, but again, I always did see used copies around available. But this is really something, and that's what I have. I kind of all right. I showed a couple of individual artists, but I pretty much avoided them. I wanted to focus on the series, the CDCM Computer Music Series on Centaur Records. Fantastic. I don't know where Centaur's out of. I know it's since it's all U.S. Schools. I know it's American, and it's printed in Canada, but I don't actually know where the label is based out of. But on last count, there were some 40 some odd volumes of this, and I showed you all the volumes I have. And just like the Wergo series, also, which is up past the music with computers, computer music series out of Germany, they're up in the 20 some odd volumes. I would love to have every single one of these. But I thought I would show that. It just came across my mind. So guys, I hope there's something in there for you. Hope this recording, hope the music is not too loud in the background. And hope everybody's week is going well and hang in there. Weekend's coming. And I will be back soon. Thanks for watching, guys.